Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than you ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty. It's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than they ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than they ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty. It's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than they ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than they ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than they ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. Let me ask you something that might sting just a little. Why do people get angrier when you protect your peace than they ever did when you were breaking yourself to please them? That silence you're giving now, that boundary you're drawing, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. And the truth is, people don't get mad because you don't care. They get mad because they lost control over your access. There's a reason why some people panic the moment you draw a line. Not because you've done something wrong, but because they were benefiting from your lack of one. You see, boundaries aren't walls that shut people out. They're fences with gates. Gates you get to control. And for the longest time, some of us handed over the keys to people who didn't even wipe their feet before stepping into our lives. It's wild how the same people who call you too sensitive or too much are the ones who can't handle you saying, "This doesn't work for me anymore." Suddenly, when you stop saying yes to their every request, they say, "You've changed." You did. You grew, you woke up, you realized that being nice 24/7 was costing you your peace, your mental health, and sometimes even your dignity. Imagine your emotional life like a home. You wouldn't let strangers walk through your living room, go through your fridge, and sleep in your bed just because they knocked, right? So why are you letting emotional intruders barge into your peace, your heart, and your mind without permission? Boundaries are the locks on your door, not because you hate everyone, but because you love what's inside. There's a woman I know, strong, kind-hearted, always putting others first. She would answer every 2 a.m. call, lend money she didn't have, say yes when her heart screamed no, just to keep the peace. And guess what? The more she gave, the more people expected. Until one day, she said, "I'm tired." She drew a line. She said, I'm not available like that anymore. And the people who claimed to love her got angry. But what kind of love is that? Where access is more important than her well-being. Another example, there's a guy, a quiet soul, constantly saying okay to avoid conflict. He always helped his coworkers pick up the slack, stayed overtime for projects he wasn't responsible for, and smiled through disrespect. The moment he finally said, "I'm not comfortable with that," people said, "You've changed, man." Yes, he did. Because maturity taught him that silence isn't peace and over-perfunctioning isn't loyalty. Let me say this loud. Setting boundaries does not make you mean. It makes you honest. It means you trust yourself enough to say, this is where I end and you begin. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call them selfish. But those who respect you will adjust. You're not here to be available to everyone all the time. You're not a vending machine of emotional support, time, or energy. You are a human being with needs, limits, and worth. And every time you say no to someone who drains you, you are saying yes to the parts of you that need rest, love, and safety. So next time someone gets mad because you're finally controlling the gate, ask yourself this: were they there for you or just for what you could give them? Because anyone who loves you in truth will know that a gate is not rejection, it's respect. It's you saying, "You're welcome here, but only if you honor the space I live in." They say you've changed, but the truth is, you finally learned the power of saying, "This is where I stop, and this is where you don't get to cross." You finally understood that boundaries aren't weapons, they're declarations of self-worth. They're not made to push people away. They're built to protect everything that's sacred within you. And if someone's offended by your boundary, it's because they were never truly interested in honoring your heart in the first place. They were just comfortable with your silence. Imagine a woman, she's been the go-to for everyone, family, friends, coworkers. She's the one who fixes everything, the one who picks up the phone, even when her hands are shaking from anxiety. Her kindness is legendary, but it's not because she's at peace. It's because she's afraid of disappointing people. She gives until she's empty, then blames herself for feeling drained. And then one day, her body says, enough. Panic attacks, sleepless nights. The smile starts fading. That's when she makes the scariest decision of her life. She starts saying no. And suddenly, the people who once praised her as selfless are calling her difficult. Not because she's done something wrong, but because she's finally refusing to be their emotional crutch. And as she sets those fences with gates, she now controls. She starts breathing again, not because people left, but because she finally arrived in her own life. There's a young man working in a high-pressure office where everyone dumps their tasks on him because he never complains. He picks up the pieces, swallows frustration, and never asks for recognition. Then one day, his father gets sick. He needs time, space, emotional room to just be. He walks into the office and says, "I can't take on anything extra this week." And just like that, they call him lazy, unreliable, but he doesn't flinch because now he's choosing his father's health and his own mental stability over a toxic culture that applauded him only when he overextended. That boundary became his liberation. You have to understand, people who love your broken pieces will panic when you start putting yourself back together. When you say, this is my limit, you force them to make a choice, respect you or remove themselves. That's not harsh. That's healing. That's courage. And the moment you realize that your peace is too expensive to be auctioned off for temporary approval, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You're not distant, you're deliberate. You're not cold, you're clear, you're not arrogant, you're awake. And clarity intimidates people who thrived in your confusion. When you were unsure, you said yes to things that broke you. When you were insecure, you tolerated behaviors that insulted your spirit. But not anymore. Because now your yes has power. And your no has backbone. Some will say, you've changed. Let them. That's just the echo of their own discomfort. Because what they really mean is, you're no longer easy to manipulate. What they're really saying is, you're no longer willing to put yourself last. And that shift, oh, that beautiful shift, isn't you being mean, it's you being real. You spent years dimming your light so others could shine. Now you're building fences to protect that light. And anyone who wants to be in your life will learn how to walk through the gate with respect, not entitlement. There's this lie so many of us were fed from the beginning, especially those who are deeply empathetic, that caring means being constantly available, that love means overextending, that kindness means self-sacrifice. But here's the truth that no one teaches loud enough. Choosing distance doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally started caring about yourself. And that shift, that sacred pivot, changes everything. You spent years showing up for people who wouldn't walk a single step for you, answering calls at midnight, offering money you didn't have, being a therapist to people who never asked, how are you doing? And it felt good at first. You felt useful, wanted, needed. But the problem is, you were pouring from an empty cup and calling it compassion. You were bleeding and letting others call it love. That isn't empathy. That's emotional exhaustion, wearing a fake smile. Let me tell you about Aisha. She was always the strong one in her family, the problem solver, the caretaker. She raised her siblings, managed her parents' expectations, stayed in contact with every relative to keep the peace, but peace never came. Only demands, only phone calls when something was needed. And one day, after weeks of migraines and burnout, she stopped answering. She took 2 weeks off. No explanations, no apologies. She went quiet, not out of anger, but out of necessity. That silence wasn't neglect, it was survival. And you know what happened? People got mad. They accused her of being selfish. But for the first time, Aisha felt like she could breathe. Because choosing distance didn't mean she stopped loving them. It meant she finally loved herself enough to stop drowning. Or take Rayhan, a school teacher who everyone leaned on. He was the unofficial counselor, the mediator, the volunteer, the fixer. Until he realized he was always emotionally exhausted. He'd go home with other people's burdens and lose sleep trying to solve them. And then one day he said, no more. He started referring issues to the right channels. He stopped being on call emotionally. Some people took offense, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had space in his own mind to think, to rest, to heal. That wasn't indifference. That was regulation. That was choosing his sanity over his savior complex. You see, caring deeply doesn't mean you let people drain you dry. Real empathy begins with you. If your emotional tank is empty, how do you keep running? How do you keep giving? You don't. There comes a moment when you realize you've spent years performing, not in front of a crowd or on some grand stage, but in daily life, behind closed doors, in conversations, in friendships, in relationships. You laugh when you're hurting. You say it's okay when it's not. You make yourself smaller so others can feel big. You tiptoe around people's moods. You overthink every word and you dilute your truth just so no one feels uncomfortable. That's not peace. That's survival. That's emotional contortion. And it's exhausting. And then one day, you stop. You stop bending. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop explaining yourself. You stop dancing for their comfort. And suddenly, the applause goes quiet. People who used to praise your kind heart now whisper, "She's got an attitude." No, you don't. You've just reclaimed your rhythm. And the music you're moving to now, it's not their playlist anymore. It's yours. Let me tell you about Sana. She worked in a corporate office where she was known as the sweet one. She would pick up others' workloads, stay late without recognition, smile through meetings where her ideas were stolen. She thought being liked meant staying silent, until one day, her supervisor took credit for her third project in a row. That evening, Sana didn't cry like she usually did. She sat still. The next day, she walked in and requested a one-on-one. Calm, clear, firm. "I will no longer work overtime unless credited and compensated," she said. Suddenly, she wasn't the sweet one anymore. Now she was difficult. But in her reflection, she saw someone she hadn't met in years. A woman who finally respected herself. Or take Jamal. In his friend group, he was the glue, always hosting, always paying, always the peacemaker. But when he finally set a boundary, refusing to be the emotional trash can for everyone, people said, "You've changed, man." Yes, he did. He stopped laughing at disrespect. He stopped allowing sarcasm that masked envy. He stopped being the emotional ATM. And when he chose peace over performance, he was suddenly too proud. But that label didn't shake him, because finally he understood. Their comfort was built on his compliance. People will always have something to say when the version of you they could use no longer exists. The moment you stop being their emotional puppet, they will try to frame your boundaries as betrayal. They'll say you're cold, selfish, arrogant, not because it's true, but because they can't manipulate you anymore. They don't miss you, they miss your submission. They miss the easy version of you, the agreeable one, but that version of you was never free. You don't owe anyone the performance of your pain. You don't have to put on a show to make others feel at ease when you start showing up as your authentic self. Unfiltered, clear, grounded. It will threaten those who relied on your silence. But your truth is not up for negotiation. Your peace is not a compromise. You're not catching an attitude, you're catching your breath. You're not being rude, you're being real. And if real makes people squirm, let them. You're not here to be someone's comfort show. You're here to be whole. And sometimes that means stepping off their stage and building your own platform where you no longer need applause to feel worthy. For so long, you were taught to manage people's emotions, to soften your words, shrink your truth, and swallow your boundaries just to keep the peace. You learned that saying no might make someone cry, get angry, or walk away, and somehow you believed that was your fault. But here's the truth. They don't want you to know. How they react is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to honor your truth with integrity, not to babysit their discomfort. Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a storm and someone hands you an umbrella. But instead of covering yourself, you hold it over them, letting the rain soak you while they stay dry. That's what emotional caretaking feels like. You're breaking, but they're comfortable. You're losing sleep, but they're satisfied. And the moment you say no more, the very people you protected from the storm look at you like you're the one who changed the weather. Take the story of Zara. She always made herself emotionally available to her mother, who had a tendency to guilt trip her anytime she made a decision for herself. When Zara got a job offer abroad, her first thought wasn't joy. It was, how will mom take this? She delayed her dream for 2 years. 2 years of waiting, shrinking, suffocating. And then one day, she whispered to herself, her reaction is not my responsibility. She took the job. Her mother cried, blamed her, called her selfish, and still Zara left. And that flight didn't just take her to a new country. It flew her into a life where she finally belonged to herself. Or think of Musa, a young man raised in a culture where saying no to elders, even when they were wrong, was considered disrespectful. He grew up always agreeing, always obeying, even when it felt like self-betrayal. The first time he said, "That doesn't feel right to me," his uncle shouted, "You've become arrogant." But Musa didn't flinch, because he had learned that growth often sounds like rebellion to those who never grew themselves. His tone was calm. His boundary was clear. His soul finally free. Here's the thing. When you speak your truth, some people will try to punish you with guilt, shame, or silence. Don't fall for it. That's not your weight to carry. You are not the emotional landfill for other people's insecurities. You don't exist to protect people from the consequences of your honesty. Your clarity may trigger their chaos, but that chaos is theirs to clean up. Every time you tell the truth, you are lighting a torch inside of you. Every time you choose what's healthy over what's familiar, you are healing generations. And yes, they might call you rude, cold, distant, but if your peace threatens their control, then it was never love to begin with. It was dependence. It was possession. And your refusal to participate doesn't make you cruel. It makes you conscious. You are not responsible for managing how others experience your growth. If they loved the old you, the one who people pleased, apologized constantly, and sacrificed yourself on the altar of approval, then of course the healed version of you will feel threatening. But don't shrink to fit into spaces you've already outgrown. How they react is their work. How you show up is yours. You're allowed to disappoint people. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose peace, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Because your life is not a performance, and you are not here to keep everyone happy. You are here to be whole. And that wholeness will cost you their comfort, but it will give you back your freedom. They don't recognize you anymore, and that's the point. You don't overreact, you don't beg, you don't chase, you don't scream to be heard. You've become calm, centered, grounded. And to people who are used to feeding off your chaos, that peace looks like coldness. But you're not cold. You're not detached. You're regulated. That's it. You're banged. Don't calm. Don't regulate. You've simply stopped living in survival mode, and they don't know how to handle the version of you. You used to respond to everything, a side eye, a passive aggressive comment, someone pulling away emotionally. You used to spiral. You'd replay conversations, lose sleep, over apologize for things that weren't your fault. You try to fix what wasn't yours to fix. You were hyper vigilant, constantly anticipating reactions, walking on emotional glass. That wasn't love. That wasn't maturity. That was trauma wearing a mask of loyalty. Now, you don't explain every silence. You don't justify every no. You don't perform emotional CPR on people who choose to suffocate in their own projections. And because you've stopped dancing for their drama, they say, you've gone cold. No, you've gone inward. You've gone wise. You've gone free. Think about Amina. She was the kind of person who felt every room too deeply. She'd absorb the tension in a conversation like a sponge. When her partner was upset, she'd panic and rush to soothe, even when she wasn't the cause. She mistook codependency for love. But after therapy, journaling, and months of shadow work, something changed. She stopped responding out of fear. She started pausing before reacting. When her partner gave her the silent treatment, she didn't chase. You don't care anymore, he said, but Amina did care, just not at the expense of her sanity. Or think of Daniel, the eldest son in a family that thrived on emotional explosions. He was always the peacekeeper, the fixer, the emotional filter. Every argument, every misunderstanding, he'd jump in to smooth it over, even if it burned him inside. But one day, after a particularly volatile dinner, he stood up, walked away, and didn't return the call for 3 days, not out of anger, but out of awareness. He wasn't abandoning anyone. He was choosing himself. When he finally spoke, it was with clarity, not rage. "Oh, you think you're too good for us now?" his cousin spat. No. Daniel was no longer addicted to chaos, and that made him dangerous, to dysfunction. You see, emotional regulation doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you choose what deserves your energy. It means you don't yell to feel powerful. You don't cry to feel heard. You don't threaten to feel seen. You know your worth now. And because of that, your peace is no longer negotiable. People will always mislabel what they can't control. You're distant. No, I'm discerning. You've changed. Yes, I've evolved. You used to care more. I still care. I just stopped proving it to people who use my care as a leash. You're not emotionally unavailable. You're emotionally intelligent. You've learned that not every situation deserves a response. Not every conflict deserves your involvement. Not every person deserves access to the most vulnerable parts of you. And yes, your silence may make them uncomfortable. Your stillness might make them itch. But that's not your burden to hold. You are not here to be emotionally consumed by every storm that passes. You've built shelter now, and from the inside it feels like warmth, like clarity, like strength. They can call it ice cold if they want, but you know deep down, it's the fire of your healing finally burning steady instead of burning out. There was a time you gave everyone a front row seat to your life. Every story, every vulnerability, every celebration. You invited them in, made space, bent boundaries, and gave pieces of yourself for free. And at first it felt generous. It felt noble. But then it started to feel hollow because not everyone clapped when you won. Not everyone respected your truth. Some took your openness as weakness. Some took notes only to use them against you later. And that's when it hit you. Not everyone deserves front row access to you. You are not a public show. You are a sacred experience. And sacred things are protected, not. When you start healing, you begin to realize the importance of access. Who gets it, who earns it, who honors it. The version of you that was desperate for validation gave too many tickets away. The version of you that honors your worth now knows better. Think about Rabia. She was the kind of friend everyone leaned on. She shared her dreams, her pain, her progress, thinking that transparency meant connection. But over time, she started noticing little jabs in group settings. People who once supported her suddenly felt competitive. They belittled her goals, mocked her confidence. That's when she realized, not everyone who listens to your story is cheering for you. Some are just gathering intel. So she stopped oversharing. She pulled back, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. You've changed, they said. You've become distant. No, Rabia just started treating herself like the treasure she is. And treasures are not left lying around. Then there's Hamad, a naturally trusting soul. He believed in the good in people. He'd let new friends in too fast, talk about his struggles, his heartbreaks, his fears, until one day those same friends laughed at his vulnerability. Man, you're too soft, they joked, but that joke cut deep. It woke something in him. And from that day on, he promised himself, the next time someone wants my truth, they'll have to earn it. He didn't become closed. He became conscious. He stopped opening the door for people who only wanted to browse, not build. You must understand, your energy is a currency. Your presence is a privilege. Not everyone has the emotional maturity to hold your heart, to celebrate your rise, to protect your wounds. And it's not your job to convince them to. It's your job to discern, to ask, have they shown consistency? Have they earned trust? Do they clap in private, not just in public? Do they protect my name when I'm not in the room? If not, then what are they doing in your front row? Setting boundaries doesn't make you unkind. It makes you aware. You can still love people and limit access. You can still wish them well from a distance. You can still forgive, but not forget who mishandled your vulnerability. Because every time you let the wrong person too close, you risk being cut in the same place you're trying to heal. You don't have to be available to everyone. You don't have to reply to every message, attend every event, or explain every decision. You don't owe anyone a seat in your life just because they once walked through the door. This is not arrogance. It's alignment. It's recognizing that the version of you that lets everyone in is the same version that kept getting hurt. And now you know better. Now you vet the energy before you allow the entry. Now you give backstage access only to those who've proven they can handle the real you, not the edited version, not the easy to love version, but the whole, complicated, brilliant, healing, evolving masterpiece that you are. They called you heartless when you stopped explaining. They called you distant when you stopped chasing. They called you arrogant when you raised your standards. But let me tell you something. They don't hate your peace. They hate the fact that they no longer have power over it. They don't hate your growth. They hate the fact that they're no longer invited into the parts of you that once needed their approval to survive. This version of you, the one with boundaries, with grace, with silence sharper than any argument, this version is sacred. You didn't become cold. You became clear. You didn't stop loving. You just stopped losing yourself trying to be lovable. You've evolved from begging to choosing, from surviving to thriving. And now they say, you think you're better? No, you know you're worth more. And that self-knowing, that unshakable inner ground, is the most dangerous thing you've ever walked into. Let them gossip. Let them misunderstand. You don't owe anyone clarity who thrives off your confusion. You don't have to keep being the soft place for people who only show up when it's convenient. You don't have to carry the weight of everyone's expectations while you're trying to breathe. The price for your peace is not your exhaustion. Like Brené Brown said, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. And you dared. You risked being called every name in the book just to sleep peacefully at night. That's not weakness. That's warrior work. Because choosing yourself in a world that taught you to shrink is an act of radical rebellion. You are no longer here to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. You're not here to keep your light dim so others don't feel insecure in their shadows. You're not here to keep explaining your worth, begging to be chosen, or performing to be enough. You are enough simply by being. As Steve Maraboli said, the most powerful relationship you will ever have is the relationship with yourself. And you've chosen to honor it, to protect it, to nurture it. That's why you stopped over-explaining. That's why you stopped arguing. That's why you chose distance. Not out of pride, but out of peace. You're not trying to win anyone anymore. You're not trying to be liked by those who never had the capacity to value you in the first place. People miss the version of you who needed them. Let them. That version of you didn't know how to rest, how to say no, how to walk away from what burned. That version begged for crumbs, mistook chaos for connection, and called pain part of the process. That version is gone. And in her place is someone who speaks less and listens to their own soul more. Someone who doesn't react, but responds. Someone who doesn't force it, chase it, or beg for it. Because what's meant for you, you won't have to suffer for it. As Jay Shetty said, don't let someone else's opinion of you become your reality. Your reality is power. Your reality is peace. Your reality is presence. And it doesn't require applause. It doesn't need permission. It just needs you, authentic, whole, and finally home in your own skin. And if they're mad about that, let them be. Because you didn't come this far to stay soft for a world that profits from your silence. You came to rise. You came to roar. You came to remember. And now you are no longer accessible to anything that makes you forget who you are. And so